Okay, and we are back, and thank you for tuning in tonight. And we left talking a little bit about methadone, and the other nice thing about methadone in treating addiction and also treating pain is the fact that it can be dosed on a once-a-day basis, so that it does last long enough, and it makes it conceivable for people to come in and get their dosage. In higher doses, methadone is quite effective in treating pain. In fact, it is quite potent when compared to morphine. In lower doses, it's basically about 5 times as potent. In higher doses, it can be as much as 15 times as potent as milligram per milligram for morphine. So it is a linear scale, so to say. It has a curvilinear thing in smaller doses, and as higher doses, it becomes almost, like I said, 15 times as effective. And I've seen providers in town, unfortunately, make errors in conversion of methadone when they convert someone that's taking a short-acting opioid like Percocet and convert them to methadone. They'll sometimes do this thing with, oh, you're on 80 milligrams you're taking 8 Percocet a day, I'll put you on 40 milligrams of methadone. Well, it's just not that simple. 40 milligrams of methadone is the equivalent of almost 500 milligrams of morphine. So it's very, very difficult to make that conversion, and you should know what you're doing when you're doing that. Not only that, when you get over 20 milligrams of methadone in your body, it has the opportunity or the possibility of prolonging one of the QT intervals, which is in an EKG. The Q wave is the beginning of one particular part of the heartbeat, and the T wave is the ending, and it can prolong that QT interval. And there are a lot of drugs that can prolong QT intervals, and one of those drugs that is being used as an alternative, and I don't get Medicare, I really don't, and I'm going to digress here for a second because I have a tendency to do that, but we get notified from, let's suppose, one of the HMOs that a drug like Flexeril, which is a muscle relaxant, is a drug that they don't like and they don't want you to use in the elderly people because it promotes falls and it has some issues with somnolence and sleepiness. But they'll allow you to use tizanidine, which is just as sedating, but it prolongs the QT interval, and so it can be just as dangerous. So there's no real answer, but of course Medicare, I guess they pay the bills, so they make the rules. At the Midas touch, right? The man who's got the gold makes the rules. But anyway, that being said, methadone can prolong the QT interval, and that can be quite dangerous. So if you are one of these patients that's out there in the listening audience that is on a dose higher than 20 milligrams or around 20 milligrams, I try and limit it at 20, but then you must have an EKG done to make sure that your QT interval is not being prolonged. And I had one patient that I did and bumped up to 25, and she prolonged the QT interval, and we took her back down to 20, where it didn't show its effect. So it is a real phenomenon, and it really does happen. Other than that, I think you shouldn't be afraid of it. If your doctor wants to talk about converting you from a short-acting opioid to a long-acting, methadone could be a nice alternative. It's certainly a lot cheaper than the prices that you're seeing today. It's been around for years, so don't be afraid of that, and don't be trapped into, well, that's what they give heroin addicts, because it is a very, very, very good pain reliever. Okay, so with that being said, that should close that out. And if there's any questions related to that or what I just said, feel free to call in, and I'll try and answer that again, or answer what questions I might have put in your mind by that dialogue regarding methadone. Back to the insulin resistance, and one of the things that we talk about in weight gain and diabetes development. Basically, when we're young, we have a lot of muscle mass, and we burn a lot of calories, meaning the actual caloric burn rate for a young teenager might be as much as 30 calories per pound, so that if you have a person who weighs 100 pounds and they're pretty active, they can eat 3,000 calories per day and actually maintain their weight and never have a particular problem. As we get older, that metabolic rate does fall down to about 15 calories for an adult, and maybe slower for even someone who is a little bit more debilitated. However, fat burning occurs at 20% of the aerobic heart rate. So that's why you see some people that are extremely in their 80s will basically start losing weight, because if you take 210 minus your age, you are now a heart rate of 210 minus your age, you're basically getting the aerobic conditioning rate. So if you're 80, 210 is 130, and 20% of that could be in the 80s. So if your heart rate exists in the 80s and you're 80 years old, you're actually a burning fat sitting there doing nothing. If all the math works to be exact. So as we get older, we develop less muscle mass and we develop more obesity, more abdominal obesity. We trade that muscle for fat. And I think that has a lot to do with the sedentary lifestyle that we live. And that being said, when we're young, we get up from the table and we go play. Except that used to be the way it was when I was growing up. Now they go up and they sit in front of the TV and they get back on their Xbox. And you wonder why you see so many obese children. Instead of us building muscle, which is what this insulin does, and I talked about it last time, is that insulin builds anything. Anabolic steroids build muscle, and insulin builds anything. So if you eat and sit, you will build fat. If you eat and exercise, you will build muscle and you will burn calories. And that is really the take-home message. That's why I heard it in a audio digest CME, where it talked about this guy who went to France, and basically he thought he was going to gain 10 pounds doing all the cooking schools, but because they walked everywhere after they ate, they actually lost several pounds on the trip. So that being said, walking after you eat is like giving yourself an invisible insulin, because insulin makes you gain weight, but if you're exercising, you're not gaining weight, you're actually losing weight. And so it's very, very important to realize that insulin resistance is the name of the game. And in order to change that, from being an insulin, what do I mean by insulin resistant? It's basically, it's almost like being opioid resistant. It ties in together. The more insulin you take to lower your blood sugar, the harder your pancreas has to work to make that happen. That being said, the normal fasting insulin rate should be less than double digits, should be somewhere in between 2 to maybe 6. And when you have a fasting insulin of 2 to 6, then you are basically not insulin resistant. And what that means is your body's not cranking out a ton of insulin to try and keep your blood sugar under control. Those diabetics that are obese are basically obese because they're basically cranking out a ton of insulin to maintain their blood sugar. And in doing so, they're already burning. They're just making more fat. They dissolve fat and they make fat. And so they never really get ahead of the curve at all. And they're like the rat running the maze. They can't get off. And the only way you can get off of this insulin resistant thing, is not to take more insulin. I mean, I see diabetics come into the office and they're 350 pounds and they're on, 100 units of insulin, and they're taking, shots of 20, and they're taking huge amounts of insulin to control their blood sugar. And it's insane. It's insanity, because they're never going to lose weight. And they're all trying to control their blood sugar. And there is no limit on the amount of insulin they can give them, and it's just making more fat. I mean, you're basically making that person sicker, all in the interest of just controlling their blood sugar. And this is the horrible thing about blood sugar. The horrible thing about eating and the food that we eat. When I come back, we'll probably do some slides at the end of this next short segment, where I demonstrate a lot of what we call the horrors of basically sugars. What it does, it just, when your insulin goes high, it basically drives your cholesterol high, it drives your triglycerides high, it drives all those things high. And no wonder we have so much heart disease and so much obesity and so many other things in this country today, because we're a consuming nation. And we got into that discussion the other day about this world economy and the fact that, you know, the Americans basically are the consuming mouth of the world, while the other world works to feed us. And it's unfortunately related to the economic of the petrodollar system. And I know this is a medical show, not an economic show, but if you don't know anything about the petrodollar system, basically it was created by Tricky Dicky Nixon in the 70s, when he basically got rid of the gold standard and basically promised our military might against for the protection of the oil fields, as long as the oil producing exporting countries of the world, OPEC, sold their oil in dollars. So therefore, if China wanted oil, they had to buy it in dollars. And this in lies the root of a lot of evil that is out there today. And so it really is. So that being said, America has become, that's why we don't manufacture anything, because we buy everything, because everybody has to buy our debt. And that's why the dollar, they're so plentiful in the world, because they have to have it to buy oil. So anyway, we're going to go to break, and you can look that up on the web. Just go look at the petrodollar system and educate yourself. We'll be back in a minute. Thank you.